Hello and welcome to Maximum Kiss. It was written and researched by Scott Gigney, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it's read by Louise Weekly.
Paul and I started literally singing on the streets. In England they call them buskers, and we'd sing old Beatle things, and I'd usually take the higher harmony, which is funny because later on in the group I usually took the lower harmony.
The time is 1971. The place is New York City. To its residents, the Big Apple is the centre of the world. To outsiders, it's a place where the chances of dreams coming true are better than average. It is also a place of great change and dramatic transition. The end of the war in Vietnam is still only years away, and the hippie movement is no longer in motion, grinding as it has to an inauspicious halt. The Ramones are 5 years from their formation, and the musical roost is ruled by Lou Reed's Velvet Underground and Iggy Pop and the Stooges. 1971 also marks the evolution of a band by the name of Wicked Lester. A band that was destined to be the spawning ground for one of the greatest phenomena in the history of guitar-based music, the rock and roll circus themselves, KISS. Wicked Lester was formed in 1970 from the remnants of another band called Rainbow. The band was made up of Steve Coronel on guitar, Brooke Oslander on keyboards, Tony Zarella on drums, plus Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley on bass and guitar respectively. In addition to their instruments, Gene and Paul were in charge of the vocal duties as well. According to popular myth, the band's name supposedly came from the wicker furniture store that occupied the space below their practice room, though this has never been confirmed or denied by any of those in the know. Throughout 1970 and into 1971, the band forged ahead and tried their best to put a decent collection of songs together. Sticking with the grand tradition of all similar groups who deemed themselves to be rock and roll, they played in every toilet venue that would take them. Like many bands before them, Wicked Lester found out that very often their only audience would be one man and his dog, but still they plugged on, honing their songs and defining their sound. Thanks to the interest that a handful of labels had shown to Rainbow, in early 1971, Wicked Lester were able to negotiate a one-album deal with Epic Records. The band felt extremely happy with this development, and in no time at all they had brought Ron Johnson in as their producer and had booked themselves into a studio. The jubilation of being studio-bound didn't last long, and the band began experimenting at an ungodly rate, throwing in instrumentation that seemed to have little or no cohesion. Their newfound creative freedom had gone straight to their heads, and the whole situation could only be described as less than conducive to their musical productivity. In the autumn of 1971, Steve Coronel left the band and was immediately replaced by Ron Lejack, who fitted right in with the rest of the guys. With Ron now on board, the band actually managed to curb their more whimsical experimentations and get a record down on tape. However, when, in early 1972, they handed the album over to Epic Records, the reaction it garnered was less than enthusiastic. In fact, Epic's reaction was close to being downright hostile. The general consensus was that the label didn't like the album one bit. After all, they had signed a straight-ahead rock group and weren't interested in the pompous excesses that the band had produced in the studio. Despite the distaste felt by many at the label for Wicked Lester's debut effort, someone up on high still wasn't ready to call time on the band. They were told to go back into the studio and completely redo the record in a more straightforward fashion, to effectively do it the right way. The band were less than happy with this situation. They all felt that they had produced a worthwhile record that deserved to be heard by the public. So, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons set about ensuring that the people got a taste of the real Wicked Lester. The resulting incident proved to be a most unpleasant experience for the pair. After a little asking around, Paul and Gene managed to secure some airtime on a small New Jersey radio station. It was their first radio appearance, and they were both filled with anticipation. The excitement grew as they heard their record playing on the radio for the first time, but that feeling was to be short-lived. In between songs, the DJ asked the station's listeners to call in and talk to Paul and Jean. There was no response. The phones lay silent. Their embarrassment was such that they actually phoned some friends and begged them to call the station masquerading as fans of the band. The whole debacle was so demoralising that it proved to be the end of Paul and Jean's involvement in Wicked Leicester. It was also the start of something very special.
So we rented a loft, bought equipment, literally stacked a wall full of Marshalls, and then we went looking for members. Peter was the first, and Ace was about the 25th or 26th guitar player that tried out for the band.
Paul Stanley was born Stanley Harvey Eisen in Queens, New York on January 20th, 1950. His parents owned a furniture store and were devout in their religious ways. Throughout his youth, Paul dreamed of being a rock and roll star. Those dreams were fueled by artists such as Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and Elvis Presley. As Paul's obvious musical talent blossomed, his parents would offer him inducements to practice hard to achieve his dreams. One such incentive came at the age of 13 when they gave him his first electric guitar. By this time, Paul was listening to bands like the Rolling Stones, The Who, and the Yardbirds. These bands were greatly inspiring to him as they were making the music that he wanted to hear. After Paul graduated from college, he took a job as a cab driver and also worked at a delicatessen, all the while playing guitar and trying out for any and all musical jobs he could find. Then, in 1970, he met Gene Simmons. Theirs was a friendship built upon mutual appreciation, and they played together in various different bands up until their dual departure from Wicked Leicester. Paul's Wicked Leicester comrade, Gene Simmons, was born Chaim Weitz in Haifa, Israel on August 25, 1949. He lived in Israel until the late 50s, at which point he and his mother relocated from their homeland to New York City, where Chaim became Gene Klein. The young Gene was being groomed to become a rabbi, but this only lasted up until he discovered the wonderful world of comic books, and, not long after that, rock and roll. Gene enjoyed childhood, and of course he fell in love with the idea of becoming a rock star. He studied by day and practiced his bass at night, and after a while he realised he was actually pretty good. He continued to play in college in bands with his fellow students. So far, so predictable. But when Gene left college, his career took a somewhat bizarre turn. He started teaching. It's no surprise that his career as an educator didn't last very long. He soon felt trapped, and as much as he enjoyed working with the kids, he couldn't handle such a mundane existence, so he quit. It wasn't long after his resignation that he met Paul Stanley and took his first steps towards the rock stardom he so craved. Peter Criss was born Peter George Criskula on December 20th, 1945, in Brooklyn, New York. As a youngster, Peter got his start in drumming after discovering the legendary jazz drummer Gene Krupa and such 60s rockers as the Rolling Stones. He played in bands throughout the 60s and the early 70s, but he was constantly frustrated as none of his musical projects ever seemed to come to fruition. This frustration peaked when a tryout for Elton John's band didn't pan out, and his close friend Jerry Nolan grabbed the opportunity to fill the drum stool for the trashy glam punk pioneers, the New York Dolls. However, Peter's luck was about to change. A pair of fellow New Yorkers answered an ad he had placed in Rolling Stone magazine stating, "Drummer with 11 years experience will do anything." The duo turned out to be none other than Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, who were in the process of putting together a group with the purpose of rebelling against the hippie bands that were so prevalent during that era. Peter got the gig and quickly changed his Italian surname Criskula to the more culturally ambiguous Criss. The KISS jigsaw was very nearly finished. There was only one piece missing, a lead guitarist. Paul Frehley was born on April 27, 1951, in the Bronx, New York. He started to get involved in music in 1965 when he received a 6-string guitar for his birthday. Just like the other future band members, Paul was a massive fan of the Rolling Stones, but his grand inspiration came early in 1967 in New York. It was here that Paul saw an awesome multi-band live show featuring The Who, Cream and others. He was blown away by the intensity that all of the bands injected into their live performances, and as a result, he began to practice his guitar more studiously. Soon after, Paul began playing with local bands, adding Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin to his list of influences. It was also about now that he adopted the nickname Ace. None of Ace's ventures were going anywhere, and so in early 1973 he answered an ad in the local paper called Village Voice, which was calling for new members for a theatrically based rock group. A few weeks after his audition, Ace joined the band. The circle was complete.
Right away, we wanted to be different, and we poke fun at ourselves, and we said, okay, let's put on our dresses and step up on stage. At that point, we didn't know what it was that we wanted to do. Let's just do something different.
Now that the band had come together, they all agreed they needed a hook, a gimmick, something to distinguish them from the countless other acts on the scene. Paul and Gene formulated a fresh and original concept almost immediately, and 25 years before anyone had heard of the Spice Girls, KISS divided themselves into 4 separate characters. These characters all had very different personas and allowed the 4 men to explore the extrovert that resided inside them all. The costumes consisted of silver spangles, bright sequins and outrageous platform boots. Anything was accepted as long as it was black or silver. But more important than any of the costumes was the makeup. It was the final touch, the masterstroke. The band started to devise possible characters that they could portray, and eventually they all selected whatever identity they felt represented them best. Paul Stanley became the star child. He loved the idea of the character, but perhaps the final element that swung his decision was the fact that his makeup was the easiest to apply. All that was required of him was that he whiten his face, rouge his lips, and paint a black star over the area of his right eye. It was Gene Simmons who developed what was to become perhaps the most recognisable of all the characters. He became the Bat Lizard. Gene was fascinated by things of a darker nature, and when he was offered the chance of devising any persona he wished, it came as little surprise that he chose such an intriguing and downright demonic character. Like Paul, the first step in Gene's makeup was the whitening of his face, but unlike Paul, he didn't wear red lipstick. In keeping with his character, he painted his lips black. The last step in the process was the addition of black face paint, which was used to create a bat-like image on Gene's face. On top of all this, there was also an inverted triangle added to his forehead, giving a look uncannily similar to Bela Lugosi in the Dracula pictures of the 30s and 40s. Ace took his inspiration from Paul Stanley's Star Child, though he went one step further in the creation of his character, the Spaceman. Ace had had some problems coming up with his persona, but when he thought of the Spaceman, he wasted no time in getting the okay from his fellow band members. Like Paul, Ace's core makeup consisted of a white face and red lips, although Ace's shade of red was a tad more subtle than Paul's. The thing that set Ace's makeup off was the silvery blue pattern that was painted over the upper portion of his face. Ace truly was the Spaceman. Peter Criss had his character pegged from the beginning. He was to become the Cat. As great as Peter thought his character to be, he couldn't have known that he would become a figure of fun for the KISS fans of the future, who considered him to be the most resolutely uncool member of the band. As with his fellow band members, Peter's makeup began with the white face, and, like Ace, he opted for a restrained shade of red for his lipstick. The finishing touch to Peter's character was the addition of his cat makeup. His eye sockets were painted black with a hint of green, his nose was also daubed with black, and finally, on each cheek, he had drawn 2 black whiskers. With the creation of the individual costumes and characters, KISS was well and truly born. With their image taken care of, the band holed themselves up to write some songs and test each other out. It wasn't long before they felt ready to do their first gig. The show went well, and the fledgling band were thrilled with the response that they received from the small though appreciative audience. Inspired by their performance, they went into the second show at the Hotel Diplomat in Manhattan, brimming over with confidence. As they played, they were unaware of the figure of Bill Aucoin, who was watching them intently from the side of the stage. Bill was so impressed with the band's performance that straight after the show, he offered the group a management contract. They readily agreed, and within just 2 weeks, Bill had negotiated their signing to Neil Bogart's newly established label, Casablanca Records. KISS were well and truly on their way.
The only thing you can really do is do the best you can when a record comes out and just put it out there and make sure that you stand behind the record. The rest is up to the record company.
Enthused by the upturn in their fortunes, KISS entered the studio in the middle of 1973. They had immense fun cutting their debut record and getting to know each other more intimately, and in February 1974, the fruits of their labour, KISS, was released. Much to the chagrin of the band, it hardly set the world alight, although it was a more than decent first-time effort. The band played a small number of gigs in support of the record, and were pleasantly surprised to find that they did have fans out there, and that these fans had bought their record and wanted more. KISS weren't about to disappoint them. As soon as they had completed the gigs in support of the KISS record, they re-entered the studio and went back to work. These sessions produced the band's sophomore effort, Hotter Than Hell. Much like their debut record, it enjoyed modest success and was much loved by the band's slowly swelling fan base. Again, they played a few select gigs, and again they went back to the studio as soon as they could. The product of these recording sessions was Dressed to Kill. It was a distinctly rocking affair and did better business than the band's 2 previous records. This was due in part to the outstanding track Rock and Roll All Night. Again, the album was embraced by the fans, and as they toured, they noticed that they were getting bigger crowds than they had ever had before. This prompted them to make one of the most important decisions of their short career, a decision that would ensure that the name KISS would become indelibly marked upon the consciousness of rock music. They decided to make a live album. As the tour continued, the band started to record their live shows. Each day before a gig, they would trawl through the previous night's tape in their search for the perfect live section. In the end, they made the album by compiling the very best of their live shows from the previous 6 months. The result was the magnificent double album Alive, released in September 1975. The response to Alive was nothing less than mind-blowing, much to the delight of the band. They had managed to capture the magic of their live performances, and people were loving it. The puzzling factor for the band was that these were the same songs that made up the vast majority of their 3 previous records. They couldn't understand why it took the release of a live album for their music to be given the respect it deserved. These weren't new songs after all, merely a new package. The band quickly dealt with their puzzlement by releasing a live version of Rock and Roll All Night as a single. It was an absolute smash hit, and the sales went through the roof. In November, it rocketed to number 12 in the charts. As people started to buy the single and the Alive album, they also discovered the KISS back catalogue. As a result, KISS, Hotter Than Hell, and Dressed to Kill started selling like hotcakes. KISS had become genuine contenders almost overnight. The band's outrageous showmanship was now reaching new heights, and the pyrotechnics were bigger and brighter. The individual band members started to expand upon their characters, and the on-stage antics of the band were often unhinged, though always hilarious. Paul Stanley regularly emulated Pete Townsend by smashing his guitar to pieces at the climax of a gig. Gene Simmons added to his demonic persona by spitting blood and breathing great plumes of fire on stage. Ace Frehley fired rockets from his trademark Les Paul, and Peter Criss acquired a revolving drum kit. Alive had captured the imagination of the public, and the kids were now flocking to KISS shows in droves. They were in love with this band because, while the music scene in America had become sterile and boring, KISS were now there kicking ass and taking names. They knew what the kids wanted, and they had every intention of giving it to them. As Alive was certified double platinum, it only served to corroborate what the youth of America already knew. KISS had become the greatest rock and roll show on earth.
We got to do what we do best. I mean, basically, we're a rock and roll band, and we're best off. You know, I mean, I wouldn't trust me in a lab trying to make an atom bomb, but I trust me on stage trying to blow one up.
As the bandwagon rolled on, the members of KISS revelled in their newfound fame. They lived life to the full, stayed at the best hotels and ate the best food. Yet in the midst of all this decadence, they still found the time to produce one of their most rounded albums. Recorded with Alice Cooper producer Bob Ezrin, Destroyer was released in March 1976. It was a full-blooded record that contained some of the best songs that KISS had ever committed to tape, such as Shout It Out Loud and Detroit Rock City. But perhaps the best of these new tracks was the riotous God of Thunder, which, unbeknownst to the band, was to become one of their most loved songs. When the time came for Gene Simmons to sing the song live, he would be hoisted up onto the lighting rig to perform it. It became a centrepiece of the KISS live show and remains a staple of the band's live set even to this day. As an album, Destroyer was every bit as successful as Alive. It was joyously received, and it went platinum in next to no time. However, there was also a genuinely surprising story. While there was little wonder that the album was doing such brisk business, the news that the single Beth had broken the top 10 was met with disbelief. Beth was a ballad that had been written and sung by Peter Criss as a tribute to his wife. For such a rocking band, it was a soppy, uncharacteristic song, but it earned Criss critical plaudits and a few songwriting awards to boot. It was back to business as usual on the band's next album, Rock and Roll All Over, which was released in November 1976. Musically speaking, Rock and Roll All Over was cut from much the same cloth as its predecessor, Destroyer. All balls to the wall rock anthems with a large dollop of tongue-in-cheek humour thrown in for good measure. Like Destroyer, Rock and Roll All Over also went platinum and continued to ensure that the band were perpetually moving forward, touring their backsides into the ground before heading into the studio to cut another record. In June 1977, KISS released Love Gun. As with the two previous albums, this record achieved platinum status with little fuss. The band were in a holding pattern, not taking any risks, and sticking to the formula that had been the secret of their success thus far. The fans were happy with Love Gun, though the same couldn't be said for the critical music press. They believed KISS to be a novelty band, and to be fair, this viewpoint had more than a modicum of truth. But regardless of their stage shows and general dumb and fun behaviour, KISS had always written good and often outstanding rock music. Unfortunately, this cut no ice with the journalists, whose musical snobbery wouldn't allow them to see past the more outrageous excesses that KISS embraced. Their minds had been made up, and their prejudiced views and opinions were totally unshakable. KISS went out on the road in support of Love Gun, and received the biggest crowds of their career. Their fan club, the Red Army, had swelled to genuinely gargantuan proportions, and the response towards the band from the members of the public was better than ever. They decided to capture the energy that was being produced at the Love Gun shows by recording some of the gigs. These recordings became the second of the band's live albums, and in October 1977, KISS released the classic Alive 2. It was a move that propelled them into the stratosphere and resulted in them being voted the most popular band in the USA in the prestigious Gallup poll. To many, KISS were like superheroes, and ironically, it wasn't long before the power of merchandising and product placement ensured that they became exactly that.
thinking is usually that as long as you don't wimp out and sell out and lose your integrity, there's nothing you can't do as long as you do it well.
As the world entered the year of 1978, KISS was simply the biggest band in the world. Their influence had spread across the whole globe, where their good time rock and roll message was being taken to heart by millions of kids. Japan especially went KISS crazy, and anything KISS related became a highly valuable commodity in the Orient. The emergence of punk at this time had no effect on the band and their grip on the rock world. The Red Army's membership was now well into six figures, and the desire for all things KISS was damn near insatiable. It was at this point that they again broke new ground when they almost single-handedly created the concept of band-related merchandising. The advent of merchandising can be directly linked to two motion pictures. The first being Steven Spielberg's 1976 movie Jaws. The release of the film coincided with a massive marketing campaign, and advertising for the movie was pushed to saturation level. Alongside this campaign juggernaut, the studio responsible for the film, Universal, granted license for selected brands to incorporate some kind of Jaws theme into their products. The response from the public towards these products was astonishing, and movie merchandising was born. However, what Jaws achieved in marketing terms was child's play when compared to George Lucas's 1977 film Star Wars. The film and its subsequent sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, were a marketing man's dream. There was literally no limit to the amount of product placement or related merchandising that could be produced to complement these films. There were masks, action figures, lunchboxes. If you could get a Star Wars badge on it, you immediately had another official product to offer the public, with the added bonus of being able to charge almost as much as you want for the item in question. This was entirely due to the fact that the target audience would happily part with their hard-earned cash in return for a yo-yo with their favourite Ewok on, or whatever else the product happened to be. It was a brave new world for those willing to exploit it. KISS just happened to be the first in line. The KISS merchandising machine was like a wild, rampaging animal. No stone was left unturned in the pursuit of the almighty dollar. As the band began to earn more and more, so they gave the green light to more and more products. Some products were good and some were bad, but they all served to line the band's ever more expanding wallets. It was clear that KISS had started to believe their own hype. And yet, the merchandising conveyor belt moved on ever upward, spewing out such products as makeup kits, pinball machines, masks, board games, sleeping bags, dolls, towels, collector's cards, and much, much more in a never-ending stream. There was a film produced for NBC called KISS Meets the Phantom of the Park, as well as a Marvel comic book dedicated to the band. The madness culminated with the release of KISS beer and breakfast cereal. Eventually, the merchandising fever that had gripped the band relented somewhat, and in September 1978, KISS produced another first. Each band member released solo albums on the same day. Somewhat predictably, the loyal legion of KISS fans were desperate to get their hands on the records. Shops were collectively forced to pre-order the biggest number of records in the history of music, such was the demand in reservation requests. It was sheer madness. The albums had varying degrees of success, and Ace Frehley came out on top. He had a top 20 US single called New York Groove, and his offering was highly commended by the critics for being a musician's album. Gene Simmons had some success with his album and even had a hit in the UK with his single Radioactive. Paul and Peter's albums performed fairly well. With their respective vanity projects out of the way, the band were able to get back to making music together, and in May 1979 they released Dynasty, which birthed the worldwide hit single I Was Made for Loving You. The record was decent enough, but by now there were tensions in the band, and not long after the album's release, Peter Criss quit.
I joined in 1980. That was right after
I think the band had recorded Kiss Unmasked. With Peter leaving the band and everything, it was a major change in the lineup right there, and the band just felt at the time that they wanted to explore something different.
Even though his resignation was fairly unsurprising, Peter's departure still left the rest of the band reeling. However, they quickly regrouped and recruited session musician Anton Fig to fill the vacated drum stool. Fig played all the drums on the next album, Unmasked, which was released in May 1980. But he was ejected in favour of a fresh and permanent replacement in the shape of Eric Carr. Carr made his live debut with the band on the 1980 World Tour, and his character, the Fox, was a big hit with fans. Eric's full initiation came when the band entered the studio to record what was to be their most eclectic record to date, The Elder. The album was a genuine attempt to break new ground. It featured lush orchestration, choir singers, and delicately crafted balladry. It was also a concept album. However, the record failed to hook the public, and the fans were not happy with the new direction that the band seemed to be taking. In June 1982, Kiss released the compilation album Killers, to muted response. The month after its arrival in the record stores, Ace Frehley was injured in a car crash. Although he had escaped with relatively minor injuries, he was affected by the crash, and 5 months after the release of Creatures of the Night, he quit the band. Ace's replacement was the volatile Vinnie Vincent. The persona that Vinnie took on was that of the Egyptian warrior, but he was also known as the Wiz. The fans loved his frenetic live performances, and he injected some life into the band, which, up until that point, had been starting to flag. But even with the new enthusiasm that Vinnie was bringing to the band, their popularity was still on the wane, and drastic measures were called for. On June 25, 1983, Kiss played their last gig in makeup. The next day, live on MTV, they removed the masks that had been concealing their identities for 10 years. Fortunately, the stunt caught the public's attention, a fact reflected in the sales of the next Kiss record, Lick It Up, released in September 1983. The fans were flocking back to Kiss shows, and things were improving. As an added bonus, the album provided the band with their first ever top 10 hit in the UK. Lick It Up turned out to be the first and last Kiss record that Vinnie Vincent was to participate on. The rest of the band had become increasingly frustrated by his erratic behaviour, and in March 1984, he was given his marching orders. In September 1984, Animalize was released. It did very good business, confirming the band's continuing resurgence. Also in that month, Mark St. John stepped into Vinnie's ample boots. Mark was a seasoned veteran, who the band felt was more than up to the job. Sadly, his tenure with Kiss was short-lived, as on the eve of the European tour, he was struck down with Reuter's syndrome, a disease that makes the joints swell, causing the sufferer much discomfort. The tour was saved when Bruce Kulick stepped in as a temporary replacement. But as it became obvious that St. John was not going to return to the ranks, Kulick was invited to become a full-time member, and, naturally, he accepted. The band released Asylum in September 1985. It did fairly well, but the truth was that Kiss had been eclipsed by the explosion of glam rock in Los Angeles. They toured Asylum hard and achieved some commercial success, though they were no longer the cool band they used to be. Kiss were now being packaged as a nostalgia trip, a fact that hardly enticed new listeners. But as Kiss already had so many loyal fans, it hardly affected their sales. It was, however, their next record that was to have a real impact on rock music.
We saw a bootleg double album that came out of Australia called Hard to Believe, which featured 25 punk bands covering Kiss tunes, and we were knocked out. Then we saw another record called Flaming Youth that was a Norwegian Kiss tribute record featuring 16 Norwegian bands that was only released there in Norway. And we thought, you know what, all this activity, why don't we do this the right way?
When the Asylum tour ended, Kiss wasted little time getting straight back into the studio, and with Bruce on board they had new impetus. This was especially the case for Paul and Jean, who found their creative juices flowing again. The product of this time in the studio was a brand new record, Crazy Nights. It was a rocking disc, if not a groundbreaking one. However, the record provided the band with their biggest hit in the UK, when the single Crazy Crazy Nights hit number 4 in the charts in October 1987. It was closely followed by another top 40 hit, Reason to Live, which clearly showed that the band's profile had never been so high in Great Britain. Hot in the Shade succeeded another compilation album, Smashes, Thrashes and Hits, in October 1989. It produced another US hit single, Forever, which reached number 8 in February 1990. The band were riding high, but the KISS train was about to be derailed. Work on a new album with producer Bob Ezrin was delayed when Eric Carr suffered complications arising from his fight against cancer. Tragically, Eric died on 24th of November in New York. He was only 41 years old. Despite this terrible setback, the remaining members of KISS vowed to carry on and keep the band alive. Everyone knew that it was what Eric would have wanted. The first project the band immersed themselves in after Eric's premature demise was a cover of Argent's classic track, God Gave Rock and Roll to You. The song was to become the centerpiece of the soundtrack to the hit motion picture Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. The video for the song was a poignant memorial to Eric, as it was the last recording he had contributed to with the band. The song, like the movie, was an unqualified success. Sales were nothing short of phenomenal, and in January 1992, the band again rocketed into the UK charts at number 4. It was a moment to be cherished after a year that had been so full of tragedy for the band. Things were at last looking up. The band recruited ex-Black Sabbath drummer Eric Singer as Carr's replacement and got down to work on a new album. Revenge was released in May 1992 to an enthusiastic response. It was arguably the closest the band had come to having a metal edge to their music. This was underlined by the album's sleeve photos, which pictured the bands dripping in leather and chains. Revenge furnished the band with their highest charting US album when it stormed in at number 4. It was also their first top 10 release since Dynasty had reached number 9 in 1979. There was no denying it, the new album was a hit. Over the course of the Revenge tour, KISS recorded and released a live 3. It was hardly the most inspired move and did them little favours. The question now arose, what was going to be the next project on the KISS agenda? Unbelievably, the answer was a tribute album. Kiss My Ass was released in mid-1994 and showed how much the young artists of America owed to the band. They were falling over themselves in excitement at the prospect of being included on the album and having the chance to pay homage to their heroes. The record included talents as diverse as Garth Brooks, Lenny Kravitz, Dinosaur Jr., Stevie Wonder, the Lemonheads, Faith No More, Rage Against the Machine, as well as a whole host of others. A whole new generation of kids discovered the band as a result of their favourite band's exertions on Kiss My Ass. KISS was suddenly cool again. Thanks to the success of Kiss My Ass, the original KISS lineup were offered the chance to record a one-off MTV Unplugged show. They agreed for old time's sake, and the result was historic. It was the first time that they had played together in nearly 17 years. Their set was greeted with rapturous applause, and aside from the wrinkles, the greying hair and the lack of makeup, you wouldn't have guessed that it had been 23 years since the band's genesis. The sales of the Unplugged album were very good, and even though the current lineup already had a new album in the bag, both Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons knew in their heart of hearts they couldn't carry on. Not without Peter and Ace. After a lot of negotiating, they extended the hand of friendship, which both Ace and Peter embraced. In April 1996, the reunion tour was booked across the world, with tickets in America selling out in 47 minutes. The band released another compilation album, You Wanted the Best, You Got the Best, to accompany the tour. And on June 28th, the KISS machine started to sweep across the United States, spreading their rock and roll gospel as if it were wildfire. As the American dates neared their end, the band were invited to attend a little rock festival in England. That festival was Donington.
we're not going to do the audience or the Hammersmiths because we want to bring over the American stage show. So we want to show you what an airplane landing field looks like with Kiss playing on top of it with huge amps and, you know, the American style show.
August 17th, 1996 was a historic day for rock and heavy metal. 60,000 rabid, metal-hungry fans descended upon Castle Donington for the biggest annual rock and metal festival held on British shores. They were here to see the Monsters of Rock. Glorious sunshine bathed Donington, and as the gates opened up, the excited fans poured in, eager to see the stage and to get the beers in. As the crowds arrived, so the anticipation reached almost unbearable levels, and at midday, Cecil took to the second stage. Their antics were displayed for all to see on the giant screens that adorned either side of the main stage. But as proficient as they were, Cecil were merely the hors d'oeuvres. At 12:30, the first course was served onto the largely unsuspecting crowd. Fear Factory hit the stage like a neutron bomb, and for the first of many times that day, a massive mosh pit erupted at the front of the stage, tearing its way through the crowd like some kind of demented tornado, sucking in everyone who stood in its path. The pit continued through Fear Factory's set, eventually coming to a halt on the last note of their last song. As another band emerged onto the second stage, the assembled moshers took time out for a little rest and recuperation. Their convalescence lasted until Paradise Lost hit the main stage 30 minutes later. The band revelled in the reception that the crowd gave them. They were, after all, one of only 2 British bands appearing on the main stage. Their set flew by, and the pit they generated was even more frenetic than the one Fear Factory had created. The crowd's applause signalled just how appreciated Paradise Lost's set was. Again, another band hit the second stage before Dog Eat Dog emerged into the warm sunlight on the main stage. Despite some heckling from the more set-in-their-ways metalers, Dog Eat Dog went down a treat. Their sunny, upbeat tunes allowed the assorted crowd to kick back and mellow out. This was especially helpful, as the next band on the main stage were heavyweight Brooklyn Bruisers' Biohazard. The whole crowd went crazy as the band tore out lump after lump of metallic hardcore. It was a punishing set, and the crowd was thankful for the half-an-hour break that followed. After the rest period, an announcement was made over the PA. Sepultura frontman Max Cavalera and his wife and manager of the band, Gloria, had flown back to America. Tragically, Gloria's son, Dana, had been killed in a car crash. Shock pervaded, but Sepultura took to the stage as a 3-piece. They soldiered on and produced what was the best set of the day, even though emotions were obviously running high. The poignancy of the set was highlighted when Evan Seinfeld of Biohazard came out and joined the band in a performance of Slave New World, a track that he had written with Max. The rapturous applause at the end of the set showed the band what high regard the audience held them in for their courage in an impossible situation. As Typo Negative and Korn entertained on the second stage, Ozzy Osbourne stepped out into the glow of the setting sun and proceeded to go absolutely crazy. The mood lightened as Ozzy reeled out classic after classic, with the biggest cheer coming as he tore into the Black Sabbath back catalogue. He played Iron Man, Paranoid and War Pigs, and the crowd just ate it up. Ozzy's voice was affected by all the dust being kicked up from the pit, but it couldn't ruin his fantastic performance. As Ozzy left the stage, the excitement levels began to rise. Kiss were on next. At twilight, the Star Child, the Demon, the Spaceman and the Cat took to the stage, and predictably the British branch of the Red Army went completely mad. After so many years, Kiss were back together. It was a magnificent sight, like they'd never been away. Paul preened camply, and Gene extended his blood-soaked tongue. Ace carved out precision riffs, and Peter didn't miss a beat all night long. Now back in makeup, Paul looked truly comfortable as he teased the audience and exchanged banter with his bandmates. They were clearly having the time of their lives. There was no pressure, only the desire to play some of the most perfect pop-rock songs of all time. Cold Gin, Love Gun, Beth, I Was Made for Loving You, Rock and Roll All Night, God of Thunder. All the classics were present and correct, and the band's 2-hour time slot disappeared in what seemed like seconds. But the best was yet to come. The band left the stage to a tumultuous round of applause, only to return a few minutes later to play an encore. After their trademark song Detroit Rock City, there was a firework display that would put any November 5th to shame. So much so that the exploding rockets set off all the car alarms in a 2-mile radius. KISS had conquered Castle Donington and left 60,000 people with memories that would last them a lifetime.
Just to give you an idea of the perspective, the American show, just the KISS sign in back of us that lights up and illuminates the stage, just the sign that spells out KISS, is 20 feet high by 40 feet wide. And then, of course, the stage spreads out from there. And to give you an idea of what, well, if you think of big, think of the United States of America, and you'll have a sense of what KISS is.
KISS returned to America uplifted by their Donington experience. They now knew what the fans wanted. Unfortunately, so did Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer. They could see that they were going to be edged out, so they did the honourable thing and jumped before they were pushed. It wasn't an amicable split. Both Kulick and Singer were incensed with the treatment that they had endured, and especially with the way that Stanley and Simmons had dawdled over the release of the Carnival of Souls album that they had both contributed to. In 1997, Eric Singer sued the band, alleging that they owed him a considerable amount of money in unpaid royalties. These incidents had little effect on the newly reformed band, however. They were enjoying each other's company again, and were in the process of writing songs for a new album. That album was Psycho Circus. The record emerged in September 1998, nearly 20 years after the original lineup's last recorded output. The album was very well received by critics and fans alike, but it was incidental in the grand scheme of things. Although they had some great fun in putting the record together, the 4 band members had been planning something new and spectacular. They wanted to be known as the greatest show on earth again, and so the Psycho Circus was born. During their 70s heyday, KISS put on a great show. They had always prided themselves on this fact, and every gig included ever more over-the-top antics. Even during their leaner years with Ace and Peter missing, Paul and Gene had always tried to put on an entertaining show, though there were none as remarkable as the events of the 70s. Now that the band had reformed, they wanted to regain their crown as undisputed princes of the rock and roll world. For any other group who had been away for such a long time, it would have been a very tall order indeed. But this was not the case for KISS, because they knew exactly what they had to do to wow their audience into submission. They had to put on a massive, spectacular show, the likes of which had never been seen before. And so they set about devising one of the most ambitious stage setups in music history. The end result of their meticulous planning was the blueprint for the Psycho Circus. The grandness of the plan had to be seen to be believed, as it involved so many different and thoroughly complicated procedures to make it work. And what's more, it was going to cost an absolute fortune. The band's record company begged them to reconsider, and of course the appeal was rejected point blank. KISS were taking their rock and roll circus out on the road, and no one was going to stop them. The show debuted at the Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, California. It was a gigantic media event, with stars of stage and screen turning out to see the spectacle of the year. As it turned out, they, along with everyone else, nearly choked on their drinks as it all kicked off. The show was magnificent. It was KISS taken to the nth degree. Of course, Gene still spat blood, and Ace still fired off his guitar rockets. But now there was so much more. Demonic clowns prowled around the arena as Paul Stanley pummeled numerous guitars into the stage. The crowning glory of the gig was a fantastic 3D film that literally took away the breath of the stunned crowd. KISS had done the impossible. They had left their unforgettable shows of the 70s in the dust and brought live music into a new realm of excessiveness matched only in recent years by Rob Zombie. KISS took the circus across America and Europe, enjoying fantastic crowds everywhere they played. In between all the touring that the band were doing in support of the Psycho Circus album, they also managed to immerse themselves in other projects. Among these was the creation of new Kiss dolls, which were designed and produced by Todd McFarlane. But even more interesting than that was the band's involvement in the production of a new motion picture by the name of Detroit Rock City. The film was a teen comedy that portrayed 4 fans trying to get to a Kiss gig in Detroit, Michigan. Of course, they encounter numerous obstacles on their way, many of which have hilarious consequences. The band loved the idea of the film so much that they agreed to appear in it, and even gave the director unprecedented access to their musical back catalogue for use on the film's soundtrack. Since its release, the film has done very well and has become yet another successful project for the band to add to their collection.
Because over a 10-year period, you can certainly see yourself age, for one thing.
On New Year's Eve 1999, Kiss took the Psycho Circus to its logical conclusion, to see in the new millennium. The show took place at the BC Place Concert Bowl in Vancouver, Canada. Support came from Big Wreck and up-and-coming Orange County pop rock band Lit. The 2 opening bands were greeted with polite applause, but the crowd weren't really that interested in them. They were there for Kiss. Kiss naturally put on a fantastic show that was perfectly suited for such an occasion. They played all the classics and fulfilled every whim of the energetic Vancouver crowd. After midnight had come and gone, Kiss was still rocking, and so were the audience. The show finally ended with everyone in the house making a single New Year's resolution, namely to rock and roll all night. And with that, the Kiss boys disappeared into what remained of the cold Canadian night. After the gig, it was revealed that the whole show had been recorded and was going to be released as a live album. That album will of course be called Alive 4. So what does the future hold for Kiss? No one except the band themselves can possibly answer that question. And who knows, maybe they can't either. For more than a quarter of a century, they have been entertaining the world with some of the best theatrical rock and roll ever committed to vinyl. The band continue to inspire the new rock stars of today. One thing is for sure, you don't have to ask Pantera's Philip Anselmo if he is a Kiss fan. Or for that matter, Rob Zombie, Art Alexakis of Everclear, or Kerry King of Slayer. They all grew up with Kiss, and in many cases their respective desire to play music can be directly related to the group that they held up as being their childhood heroes. Pantera's lead guitarist Dimebag Darrell even has an Ace Frehley tattoo on his chest. That, if nothing else, is an illustration of the impact that Kiss have had and the devotion that they have inspired in their fans. Kiss will no doubt continue well into the 3rd millennium, writing new music and bringing ever more extravagant stage shows out on the road with them. And why not? In a world where every decision seems to be life or death, where the vast majority of bands want to be thought of as serious musicians, thank goodness for a band like Kiss, a band who want to entertain and satisfy their fans. The Kiss mission directive has always been to play the greatest rock music and to put on the most entertaining gig possible. Even now, 27 years on from their inception, they are still undoubtedly the greatest show on earth.
Thank you for buying Maximum Kiss. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT3 6YY, and tell us so. We've got free copies of our next release for the best letters, so don't forget to include your name and address. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.